Thank you, Rudy. As Rudy mentioned, the compliance testing or conformance assessment is really an important part of the whole ecosystem. And the value of that conformance testing is really dependent on who you are. And so let me explain through various what we might call as use models. For example, if you are an engineer designing a product, in that case, you want to know if you design the product this way, how would it be tested? In fact, what would it be tested with? What would be the test equipment, the test environment? If the product was tested this way, what would be the report that would come out? How would the results be collected? And how would the product validation or your design's validation be achieved? So as a designer, you are obviously thinking about how the product will be tested and therefore what the conformity assessment would be. Now let's look at product manager. If you are a product manager, then you want to have conformity assessment as potentially a part of your product launch, making sure that your product is compliant with what is required in the marketplace. Let's say you are developing a USB based product or a Wi-Fi product or some sort of a standard protocol based product. In that case, you want to make sure that your product complies with that particular standard, and therefore you would not be interested in releasing the product until you receive that certification. The certification mark that Rudy talked about comes in as a proof of my product's quality or my product's usability. If you're a product manager, that's how you look at it. On the other hand, if you're a regulator, then you look at it a little bit differently. You say, for example, all the medical devices, let's say, medical devices that deal with, heart-related, treatment. In that case, you would want that all those medical devices to meet certain rigid conformity or compliance with, say, electromagnetic interference or EMI measures. And therefore, as a regulator, you see it as a responsibility to make sure that every device that gets certified meets those requirements, and therefore the conformity assessment is more as a gatekeeper or a certification authority that you want to impose on the marketplace, because you are more concerned about the use of such a device by a certain segment of the society, and you don't want them to have any adverse impact. On the other hand, let's say you are a regular consumer. In that case, you are looking at, for example, Wi-Fi as a seal, or maybe a UL as a seal of approval, indicating that this device meets certain requirements. Because as a consumer, you may or may not be technically savvy to understand what does the device really do, and how does it do it, and what is the underlying technology, etc. But somebody with a good knowledge of such a protocol or such a technology could really give you that information by providing that seal. And so of course the implication is that they have good insight into the compliance requirements, and those compliance have been achieved through a well-defined test program and a test method, and presumably through a certified test lab. All the things that Rudy mentioned, that's the environment that one has gone through, and therefore when the product receives that particular certification or that particular mark or a seal, then it creates certain value of or the quality about a product that you as a consumer can trust. So again, compliance testing or conformity assessment is a very important aspect of your product selection. Now, you could in fact be more of a professional buyer as opposed to an individual or a personal buyer. So let's say you are a purchasing agent for a large company, and you need to buy, say, 3,000 computers for your company, or large number of gadgets, of whatever kind, for your company. So at that point, the company has certain requirements. It could be that the company needs rugged computers, perhaps something that meets certain radioactive safety requirements, or it could be more of a power and temperature requirements. And so when you are selecting those things, you are really looking for, how do I make sure that my company's requirements are met on large number of such purchases, and therefore in fact my investment into buying these products is not going to be a waste. In fact, as a purchasing agent, you are really looking for certain quality assurance, and that quality assurance comes through the reports on these compliance testing. If you're a lawyer, perhaps you want your client to have mitigated its liability on the on possible product malfunction, and so one way, as a lawyer, the way you would guide your client is to make sure that certain level of compliance testing is done in a very formal manner, perhaps through a third-party lab environment, so that your product is known to perform at certain good level, and therefore potentially your product liabilities are reduced. Now, many of us can't understand the technical details of the reports and the details that are provided in there. But then, if you are really a regulator, if you are one of the design engineers or a test engineers, then that's the level of details you want to get in. On the other hand, if you are more of a consumer type of person, then you are looking for the final approval, kind of thumbs up, thumbs down, to guide your process of buying or purchasing a product and a product selection. So a number of different views on how conformity assessment is really applicable to us in our daily life, depending on whether you are doing it as an individual or as a professional. So in conclusion, I would like to emphasize 3 points for you. First, standards are very important to compliance testing because they are the ones that define requirements for what you are designing, or perhaps what kind of system you are building, and how it should be tested, perhaps what test environment should be like, and also what kind of test reports should be generated. Second thing is that compliance testing, in fact, gives you an opportunity to think through your product in a much more thorough manner, and allows you to think about all the good uses of your product and potentially bad uses of your product, and prevent your product from doing anything bad if someone doesn't use your product appropriately. And then third, and most important in my mind, is that compliance testing is based on what roles you are playing. If you're an engineer, if you're a regulator, if you're a lawyer, if you're a product manager, all of those are different ways of looking at what compliance testing means to you, what is the value for that, and in the end, how does it relate to the quality of the product.